So, new artifact mods dropped with the release of Revenant Act 2 this past week, and we were gifted this one in the last column, Arc Compounding. Arc sources deal increased damage to blind targets, and that damage increase is 15%. Now, if thinking about this mod strictly in terms of weapon pairings, there are some good options out there. Grand Overture has blinding micro missiles, Exterra spawns Lucent Moss that can apply blind, the big Kablooey shot from Tessellation carries the status effect, and Centrifuge can kill enemies and create a blinding explosion. But I gotta say, when I first saw this perk, my mind went straight to one of my favorite guilty pleasure weapons, the Queenbreaker. Ever since Bungie gave it the ability to chain arc blind a while back, I've used it quite a bit. And I know that puts me in the overwhelming minority, but I found value in it, even more so now with Arc Compounding. Just a single shot has the ability to instantly unlock the artifact mod's damage bonus. So we'll start off by seeing what kind of damage we're talking about. And just make note of the fact that I am testing this with the higher damage marksman sight. If you do prefer the lower damage, quicker firing combat sight, do your thing. Me personally, I've never had much use for it on the PvE side of the game. I stick with marksman. Back on task though. Versus the Grasp of Avarice Ogre, a base crit is dealing 66,403 points of damage. With Queenbreaker's 5-round magazine, if every shot does land as a crit, that's going to total up to 332,015. I have the time to empty clocked in at 5.28 seconds, putting the single mag damage per second at 62,882. Now, we bring Arc Compounding into the mix. The first shot of the magazine is going to hit for base damage, as this is the one applying the blind. Subsequent shots will see that 15% damage increase, scoring 76,364 apiece. So, maximum single mag damage in this case moves up to 371,859. Single mag DPS does break the 70k mark at 70,428. And while 15% isn't really a mind-blowing buff, damage per shot did climb by 10,000 points just for having the mod equipped. And to put these numbers in some sort of perspective, we're going to run them against the legendary Arc Linear Fusion Rifle, Line in the Sand. And the one we're going to be using does have a 500 millisecond charge time. An unadjusted base crit is dealing 45,698. With just the weapon's base 5-round magazine, the max potential single mag damage is 228,490. The time to empty is a bit faster than Queenbreaker's, coming in at 4.82 seconds, with the single mag DPS settling in around 47,405. So not even really in the same neighborhood as Queenbreaker's base damage output. But Line in the Sand does have access to one of the biggest weapon damage buffing perks in the game, Bait and Switch. Land a shot with all 3 equipped weapons in short order, and you'll get a 30% damage increase. When Bait and Switch is active, Line in the Sand's single shot crit damage goes to 59,408. For the max single mag damage, it's going to play out in the same way that it did with Queenbreaker. The first shot's going to activate the buff, the next 4 will reap the benefit. So we're looking at 283,330 with all crits. Single mag damage per second, 58,782. And while those numbers are definitely better, they're still not quite on par with what Queenbreaker was posting. So is Queenbreaker actually good, or are linear fusions as a whole kinda bad? I think the answer lies in the space between. It's not 2022 anymore, linears are not the damage meta contenders that they used to be. Queenbreaker is no slouch. I think it was back in Season of the Wish when it got buffed versus bosses, mini-bosses, vehicles, and constructs. But still, it's not exactly top in the damage charts, and you're not going to see it in a day 1 raid DPS rotation. But the weapon's utility, I find to be extremely good, even more so present day with the Arc Compounding mod. Applying blind in its own right is a nice feature, especially for higher end content. The enemies do become far less threatening when they are not shooting back at you. But it's not just applicable on the struck target. Queenbreaker does chain that blind to nearby enemies. The damage that it carries with it isn't overly impressive, but when I'm at full ammo reserves, I kind of view it as if I have 27 mini flashbang grenades at the ready. One well-placed shot can leave a whole pack of enemies non-combative for 10 seconds. Really nice tool if you're looking to reposition yourself mid-fight, or if you're getting overwhelmed, it can be a great get-out-of-jail-free card. And blind works versus unstoppable champions. One shot and they're insta-stunned. And thanks to that blind chaining, it doesn't have to be a direct shot. If there's a higher priority target on the field, like maybe an overload, you might be able to chill that unstop out briefly while you're focusing the overload champion down. And you can be a little bit more efficient at it due to the Arc Compounding mod. And keep in mind, any enemy that you chain that blind to is now 15% more susceptible to all arc damage. So if you're running an arc primary, you're going to see 15% more damage out of it versus blinded targets. Running an arc ability, say a grenade, if the target's blinded, that grenade will deal 15% more damage. Arc supers, you want to squeeze a bit more out of it? Quick shot with Queenbreaker, go to town. 15% damage increase applies here as well, and you can see even the jolt damage gets a boost. I've been approaching this mod as an arc damage target debuff that Queenbreaker can instantly unlock. And one more point to make about arc compounding specifically. I'm not sure if anyone's talked about this yet or if it's common knowledge at this point, but it would appear that it is an outlier debuff, meaning that it stacks with other debuffs. Normally, if multiple debuffs are applied to a target, the game should just prioritize the highest one. But generally, they do not play off of each other to award higher damage. For instance, you have concussive reload in the seasonal artifact. If you hit a boss with a grenade launcher, this will open him up to take 15% more damage, which in and of itself works just fine. Now, if I were to throw a weakening vortex grenade on the enemy, whose debuff is also 15%, when both debuffs are applied simultaneously, no additional damage, still hitting for 76,364 per crit. This is not the case with arc compounding. You will see the additional damage. And I would have to assume it's because it's element specific. I know some of you out there probably remember the old Font of Might mod. It was element dependent, but universally stacking. Kinda the same story here. So, weakening vortex grenade goes out, Queenbreaker comes in with a blind applying shot, and the following crits are now dealing 87,818 points of damage. The debuffs are stacking multiplicatively for about a 32% damage increase from base. So, whether arc compounding is a true debuff or not is arguable. What isn't is the fact that it'll combine with any other buff or debuff that you have active. So let's look at kind of an extreme case here. I'll show you what I got going on. I'm going to be on my Prismatic Warlock. A few fragments that are going to be helping out. Facet of Dominance, which is going to allow my Vortex Grenade to apply a Void Weaken. And Facet of Dawn, so I can become Radiant when dealing melee damage. My selected super is Storm Trance, because I'm also going to be using Sanguine Alchemy, which provides a 25% surge damage bonus to weapons matching the element of my super. So obviously, I wanted Arc. And if you weren't aware, this exotic also marks targets for an additional 10% damage bonus. And it should go without saying, since it's kind of the whole reason we're doing this, arc compounding will be equipped as well. If you want to see how that works out on paper, that's 15% from the Weaken, 25% from Radiant, 25% from the Arc Surge, 10% for having a marked enemy, 5% when I pop Transcendence, and another 15% for hitting a blinded target with arc compounding. So, damage phase begins, Rift goes down, Grenade goes out, Transcendence gets popped, Radiant gets acquired with the melee, Blind gets secured with the first shot, and now we are dealing 158,484 points of damage with each crit. That equates to almost a 240% damage increase. What was the point of doing all this? Well, one, I just thought it'd be fun to see how much damage I could deal with Queenbreaker, but two, to highlight the fact that even though arc compounding's damage boost is only 15%, because buffs stack multiplicatively, its true value can be much higher than that. In this scenario, without it, we'd still be upping our damage by about 207%, but with it equipped, the damage is about 32% higher than that, buying us an extra 20,000 points of damage per shot. And like I said earlier, this is an extreme case, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is, don't overlook a universally stacking damage boost, because it can be worth a lot more than its listed value on paper. But that's going to do it for this one, Guardians. If you did find the video helpful, useful, or at least enjoyable, please remember to leave it a like. I'm going to go test some solar grenades and hopefully have that damage checkup video ready for this weekend. So keep an eye out for that one when it drops. With that though, have a great day, and I'll catch you on the next one.